Traven, if that was even his real name, was born sometime between the late 1800s and the early 1900s. We don't know the exact year, the country, or even his true name. Some say that he was German, others American. The only thing we know for sure is that his life was wrapped in mystery. And that mystery was not by accident. It was on purpose, by design. For him, staying anonymous was a statement. Traven seemed to believe that his face did not matter, only his ideas did. In a world obsessed with fame, he gave up even his name. It's important to remember, Traven lived in a different time, a different world. It was a time when it was still possible to disappear. Borders were blurry, documents could be faked, and names could be changed without a trace. It was a world full of imposters with the soul of writers, anarchists publishing manifestos, spies turning into tragic heroes. Identity could be hidden, destroyed, or simply reinvented. Europe was boiling. Workers were striking, governments were failing, big ideas were jumping from coffees to the streets. Then came the World War, the first one, leaving behind more than bodies. It left behind a kind of tired bitterness. In the middle of that chaos, a writer appeared, Traven. He gave no interviews. He didn't make any corrections, no portraits. He just wrote stories. And without ever showing himself, he built a legend. In the 1930s and 40s, Mexico was full of life. Messy, yes, but also creative and open. It was still recovering from its own war, its revolution. And somehow, it became a safe place for people who had lost everything. President Lázaro Cárdenas made a bold move. He welcomed refugees, not just as guests, but as new members of the country. Spaniards running from Franco, Jews escaping what was just beginning in Europe. Artists, anarchists, scientists, poets. They brought their pain, yes, but also their ideas, their talents, and hope. One of them was Luis Buñuel, who made some of his strongest, most personal films in Mexico. Another was Remedios Varo, who painted surreal, magical, symbolic works. And across walls and buildings, the murals of Rivera, Siqueiros, and Orozco exploded with their power, telling stories full of love, rage, and beauty. In that moment, both political and poetic, a faceless writer found the perfect place to disappear, far from book fairs, far from Europe's noise. Traven lived in Mexico like someone choosing a cave, not to hide, but to understand the world from a better angle. From there, he wrote about workers, about life, about Mexican legends, not as distant topics, but as lived experiences. And in a Mexico that still smelled like smoke and revolution, those stories didn't feel foreign. They felt like truth. Welcome to this channel. I'm Bandido. If you've watched my videos or read my books before, thank you for coming back. If this is your first time, I'm glad you're here. This is a space where I explore movies, series, books, or any cultural phenomenon that I find interesting, not just for what they show us, but for what they reveal about ourselves. In this channel, storytelling is a mirror, a tool, and a compass. Welcome. In 1960, a Mexican movie did the impossible. It crossed borders, languages, and expectations, and ended up at the Cannes Film Festival. It was called Macario, based on a novel by Traven. Macario wasn't just a hit, it was a turning point. It became the first Mexican film nominated for an Academy Award. And not by chance, but because it touched on something universal, the fear of death, and the secret wish to beat it. Ignacio López Tarso played the main role, with quiet intensity. Director Roberto Gabaldón gave the film a dark, dreamlike look. Cinematographer Gabriel Figueroa added the shadows and contrasts that made it feel like a timeless nightmare. He had already won awards in Cannes and in Venice, and later earned an Academy Award nomination too. Macario wasn't folkloric cinema, it was world-class storytelling. And behind it all was Traven's invisible pen. A simple story hiding big questions. What would you do if you could negotiate with death? What's a life worth, and who gets to decide? Macario felt deeply Mexican and deeply human at the same time, universal. Maybe because Traven, in his own way, was both. The movie takes place in Old Mexico, specifically colonial New Spain, the 18th century, a world where poverty was everywhere, not just in some parts of life, but in its whole background. Macario is a poor indigenous peasant who lives with his wife and kids, surviving like millions did, right on the edge of hunger, but with his dignity intact. He is not a martyr, he is just a tired man. On the eve of the Day of the Dead, he makes a wish to eat a turkey all by himself, just once in his life. This wish might sound selfish, but it's really about something deeper, the hunger to enjoy something without guilt, a moment that belongs only to him. His wife, quiet and invisible, understands. She steals the turkey, she cooks it, and she gives it to him. That choice, even putting her own children on a second place, speaks of love and of something else, on how even a simple joy can push a man toward unexpected cruelty. Macario walks into the forest to eat in peace, but peace does not last in stories like this one. On the way, he meets three figures: the devil, God, and death. He turns away the first two, but when he sees death, he shares his meal, not because he's brave, but because he understands. No one escapes death. He figures that maybe by sharing, he can delay her a little. Death, thankful, gives him a gift, a potion that can cure any illness, with one condition. If death appears at the foot of the bed, he must let the person die. Macario becomes a healer, a mystery. People from everywhere come to see him, but power brings suspicion. The church and the government see him as a threat. The climax comes when he's asked to save the viceroy's son. He walks into the room, and then he sees death at the foot of the bed. He knows that he should not interfere, but he does. Death then takes him to a cave filled with candles, each one representing a life. And his is almost out. And in the end, we learn the truth. It was all a vision, his last daydream before dying. The turkey is untouched, and Macario dies in the forest, without having taken even a single bite. Macario is many things at once: a tale, a criticism, and also a portrait of the human condition, disguised as a folk tale. It speaks of hunger, desire, and death, and also of that silent dignity that lives in those who have never had anything. The film, with its somber tone and its unhurried rhythm, speaks with B. Traver's signature. No embellishments, no spectacle, just the truth. Macario is full of deeply Mexican symbols. Rural poverty, Catholic mysticism, Day of the Dead with its smoke and marigolds, the miraculous healer, the quiet devotion of a wife who gives everything without asking for anything back. Death not as the enemy, but as part of the everyday world. A starving man who meets God, the devil, and death, and of course, a gift that turns into a curse. Yes, it feels completely Mexican. And yet, underneath that story is an echo from far away. Not from the indigenous tradition, not from Popocatépetl, but from Europe. The roots of Macario go back to an old German folktale collected by the Brothers Grimm. It's called Godfather Death. In that tale, a poor man turns down God and the devil as godfathers for his newborn son. He chooses death, because she treats everyone equally, whether king or beggar. Just like in Macario, death gives a gift, the power to heal, but with one rule. If she appears at the foot of the bed, the person must die. The son breaks the rule, and he pays the price. So, the structure is basically the same one, and the meaning too. But Macario is not a copy. It is something better, a retelling, a version that goes deeper, that travels from Europe to Mexico, and that changes skin along the way. The European village becomes a Mexican pueblo. The cave of candles becomes an indigenous altar. The peasant stops being one man and becomes the voice of people who have always had to make peace with death. And that leads to the most surprising question of all. Who is the writer that could speak so clearly to Mexico's soul using the bones of a German folktale? The answer, of course, is B. Traven, a writer who, like his characters, lived between worlds. Before B. Traven, there was another name, Red Marut, a theater actor, an editor, a revolutionary. He lived in Munich before the First World War. On stage, but with his mind on big ideas, he ran an anarchist magazine called Der Ziegelbrenner, the brick maker. He published articles against aristocrats, against the military, and against rich people. Not to become famous, but because he felt the pressure building, brick by brick, until the whole system felt like a prison. But what defined Marut wasn't just what he wrote, it was what he did. And in 1919, he took part of the Bavarian Soviet Republic, a short-lived, dream-like leftist government that lasted just a few weeks before being crushed. After it fell, Marut was labeled an enemy of the state. He was arrested, he escaped, and then he vanished. That's where the legend begins. There's no death certificate, no grave, just silence. And then, years later and on the other side of the world, a new name appears, B. Traven, a writer with no past, no photo, publishing books from Mexico about workers, injustice, and power. The same themes Red Marut had cared about. Were Marut and Traven the same person? It appears so. But Marut erased himself. He let silence do the rest. It was as if he understood that sometimes the best way to tell a story is to disappear. There's one more name, Otto Feij. Maybe, just maybe, that was his real name. Some believe Traven was born as Otto Feij in 1882 in a town called Świeżów. Back then, it was part of the German Empire. Today, it is found in Poland. His father worked in textiles, and Otto may have grown up in a working-class world, surrounded by low pay and endless machines. According to this theory, that's where his anger started. That's where he learned to see the cracks in the system. But even this version, maybe the most believable of all, has no actual proof. No solid papers or documents, no confession, and maybe that's the real clue. Because if Otto Feij was really B. Traven, it means he chose to bury that name. A name with a place, a family, a story. A name that meant belonging. But he left it behind, like someone smashing a mirror so no one could put it back together. Because above all else, Traven wanted one thing, to be nobody. Or better yet, to be only a voice. No face, no backstory, no pedestal. You cannot talk about B. Traven without bringing up another name, Traven Torsben. That name shows up in a student record from UNAM in 1928. He took classes in Mexican literature, Mexican geography, art and literature, history of Mexico, and political and social problems. He never got a degree. Torsben said he was an American citizen. He claimed to be an engineer and an amateur photographer. He lived in Chiapas, deep in the south of Mexico, a land of rivers and forests, where outsiders can go years without being questioned. Torsben didn't talk much. He moved quietly. He helped on film sets, took notes, blended into the crowd. The kind of person that you might see 10 times and never remember his face. That ability, not to be noticed, was what gave him the power to watch, to listen, and then to tell. Over time, many came to believe, with good reason, that Traven Torsben was B. Traven's final identity, his most stable one, his most useful one. While his books were being printed in Europe, supposedly translated from the English and signed with a pen name, he was walking around small towns in Mexico, like nothing was happening. Like a ghost author watching the rise of his own work from the shadows. He didn't give interviews, he didn't go on stage, he did not pose for cameras, because he understood something few do, that mystery is not just about hiding, it can be a kind of freedom. B. Traven did not lie about who he was, he just told the truth, like it was a story. And like with any good story, what matters is not who is telling it, but what it leaves behind. Let's go a few years back, because the first time the world heard the name B. Traven, even if no one knew who he was back then, was not with Macario. It was with another story, a tougher one with more pain, a novel called The Treasure of Sierra Madre, which made it to Hollywood long before Mexican cinema embraced him. In 1948, John Huston turned it into a movie starring Humphrey Bogart, and the result was something that did not feel like anything else of its time. It won 3 Academy Awards, but more importantly, it dared to be different. No glamour, no heroes, just dust, greed, and a bitter ending. The screenplay came from Traven's novel, and The Treasure of Sierra Madre became his calling card to the world. The story takes place in Mexico in the 1920s. Towns falling apart, people barely getting by. Fred C. Dobbs is a broke American wandering through Tampico, looking for anything, a job, some money, a little dignity. Then he meets Bob Curtin, another outsider just like him. They hustle, struggle, try to survive on scraps. And then they meet Howard, an old man with too many stories and a voice full of warnings. He tells them about gold in the mountains, some tools, and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this time things will actually work out. They actually find the gold. At first, there's joy, laughter, plans for the future. But soon, the fear creeps in. Paranoia, doubt. The gold becomes a mirror, and Dobbs does not like what he sees. He starts to believe his friends will betray him, kill him, and take his share, so he runs. He steals the gold, he breaks, but the ending is brutal. Dobbs is killed by bandits who doesn't even know what he is actually carrying. The gold is spilled into the wind, dust returning to the dirt. Howard and Curtin meet again, and now the gold is gone. And finally, they laugh, not out of joy, but the kind of laughter that happens when your soul understands something that words cannot explain. Sometimes you gain something when you lose. The Treasure of Sierra Madre is a dark tale about greed, ego, and human weakness. A western with no heroes. A journey with no glory. It doesn't give you answers, but it leaves you thinking. That's what Traven did best. He told us systems of power are corrupt, but so are we. He didn't offer comfort, but he offered the truth. But maybe the most fascinating part about The Treasure of Sierra Madre did not happen on a screen, but behind the scenes. John Huston wanted to adapt the book. He even wanted his father to play one of the leads, but he hit a wall. Nobody knew anything about B. Traven. Nobody knew who he was. There was no photo, no address, no trace. So Traven didn't show up. He sent someone else, supposedly a legal representative named Hal Krobes. Krobes was quiet, thin, with an odd accent that was not quite German and not quite American, and he said he was there to speak for Traven. He stayed on set, he watched how they filmed, he gave notes, he protected the story. And here's the twist. He knew everything, every detail, every character. He made edits only the author would think to make. So people started to wonder, was Hal Krobes really just a lawyer, or was he Traven himself, watching from the shadows? Today, most people believe they were the very same man. But Krobes never admitted it. Not on set, not in interviews, not even when he saw his story brought to life by Hollywood. He just smiled and let the mystery do its work. We don't know B. Traven's real name, or where he was born, or how old he really was. There's no official photo, no memoir, no confession. And still, I believe that we actually know him. We know him through Macarius' hunger, through the quiet pain in his wife's eyes, through death, sitting at the edge of the bed. We felt him in Dobbs' fears, in the gold blown away by the wind, in that strange but honest laugh at the end of his film. We read him in stories about people fighting to keep a little bit of dignity. B. Traven might be the most mysterious author of the 20th century, and somehow one of the clearest, because while others wrote to be seen, he wrote to say something, and he showed us who he was, again and again and again, through the pages. And that is not a small thing. To know a writer through their work is more intimate than any interview, more real than any biography. And in a world like ours, where everything is explained, sold, and posted on social media, Traven is still a locked door. And maybe that's why we remember him. Because by not wanting to be famous, he became unforgettable. By giving up his face, he gained many. And by writing from the shadows, he let the truth speak for itself. Today, we celebrate that mystery. We celebrate the outsider who chose Mexico as his hiding place, and also as his voice. Today, we celebrate B. Traven, the writer we never saw, but who still speaks to us through his stories. If you would like to help to keep this channel alive, you can do a few simple things. Subscribe, give this video a like, or leave a comment with the topic that you would like to see in the next episode. It really makes all the difference. And if this story resonated with you, you will probably enjoy my books too. I am not as mysterious as Traven, but I do try to tell stories that speak to the heart, and maybe stay there a little while. My book, The Indestructible Mountain, is originally a bestseller in Spanish, and now it's available in English for the very first time. And it dives into similar questions: memory, myth, and what it means to stay human as the world begins to fall apart. All set within a haunting cyberpunk future. I will leave the link below. For today, that's all, compadre. Thanks for watching.